Kayang mag-ibig, pero sa sinagalan, alam ng puso, sa limit mo'y buhay. Lupang dinirang, weka ng mag-ibig, sa manlulubig, ikapasisigil, sa nagtatagtulong sa sipin at sa langit o babaw, ay nilatang tulakaw, sa pagkayang minamahal, at sa pagkawag ko'y natunay na nagiging, ang ituwid at parang niya kailan o kayo magiging, lumagang araw ng maraming pagsinta, huwag naging sa akin mo. Ang bigaya ng kantay malapit, ang mamatay ng nais sa'yo. We begin tonight with diplomacy and worry. Simula noon hanggang ngayon, isang naging lalo. Magkaisa ang magulong, kaibigan ay marunong. Ngayon tayo mula sa hamon ng dagat, niyamos ang pangalan na umalag. Pinangako sa puso ang paniniwala, ang ginhawa para sa kawalan. Ang samoy ng luntay, bumalabawis sugo at buhay. Kapayapaan na nabuhay, ay ang pinanglakantan. Alam berdira, at maraming magsamoro. Magsamoro, lagi kang mamahalin. Walang pinigil sa damdamin, mga pangako'y tutuparin. Habang buhay kami sa'yo'y magbabantay, mananatili sa puso't isipan. Ang lahat tumutin ay nanabuwis ng buhay, nasa piling ng may kapal. Ang samoy ng luntay, bumalabawis sugo at buhay. Kapayapaan na nabuhay, ay ang pinanglakantan. Alam berdira, at maraming magsamoro. Check-in time natin sa umagang ito, sa programa natin pang umaga. 7 minutos po, pasado po alas 8. Okay. Araw ng Miyerkules, 10 po ng Enero 2027 mga ka. Tama ba ako? 10 ba ngayon? Okay, double check natin, no? Ayan. 10 nga, no? 10 ngayon po mga kababayan. Okay, araw ng Miyerkules. Tama. Okay. 2024 mga kababayan, no? Okay, papasok ang programa po ng news, Consolidated News po natin International, ADLSNTV News International. Okay? Okay, pag monitor po natin ng iyang bakbakan po sa sa Gaza Strip hanggang ngayon po walang kalutasan. Okay? 5 beses na po si Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State, pumunta po sa area na yan. Ay kasama na po ng Middle East region mga kababayan, no? Wala pa rin solusyon po mga kababayan ang walang positive, no? Okay, walang positive. Okay, makuha po sa kanila mga kababayan sa bakbakan yan. So, ibig sabihin po ay huwag muna tayo umasa, okay, na magkaroon ng kapayapaan, no? Ayan. Okay, so papasok ang programa, Halo-Halo Special, Opinion, Balita at iba pa. Okay, kadamay, itong serbisyo publiko tinik ng mamamayan, at saka itong sumbungan ng mamamayan, mga suki, mga kababayan, no? So, babati muna ko. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Okay, magandang umaga sa inyo. Okay, sa international greeting natin, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh, no? Yung naniwala po sa programa. Okay. So, observation din ng lahat tungkol po sa US media, mga kababayan, no? Okay, pakinggan natin po itong independent news. Okay, kung ano ang puna niya po sa mga international sa US media, mga kababayan, no? Okay. Ano po ang observation nila? Kasi ang may-ari ito puro kakampi po, mga kababayan, no? Ang karamihan po may-ari po ng mga media, okay, sa US, mga American Hudyo, mga kababayan, no? American Jews. Kapwa nila po, mga kababayan. Kapwa nila. Paano po kakampihan po mahal nila po ang okay, favorite nila po itong Israel, mga kababayan, no? So, wala yan. Okay, natural po. Natural, ganun po ang okay, pananaw nila po, mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Siyempre, kakampihan nila ang favorite nila po ng itong mga Hudyo, itong mga Zionist organization, mga kababayan, no? Okay, meron Israelite Zionist, American Zionist, okay, itong European Zionist, mga kababayan. Powerful organization po sa daigdig, mga kababayan, no? Pabor yan doon sa okay, sa amo nila po. Okay, yan po sa Israel, mga kababayan, na. Okay, so pakinggan natin po ang observation po ng independent media. Ito na lang, okay, natira ata makarinig ka ng balita, no? Okay, wala ka nang makuha ngayong araw. Wala akong makuha po ng report. Okay, galing po sa mga source ko. Okay, sa pagkuha po ng balita, yung mga independent news, mga suki, no? Yung balanse ba? Balanse pagbabalita po, yung hinahanap natin po, okay? Hindi bias, mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Okay, so pakinggan natin ito kung anong observation niya. Okay, mga suki-suki, mga kababayan, mga nakikinig sa atin, anong napuna po ng itong anchor. Okay, katulad natin sa trabaho, maghawak po ng microphone, mga suki, na? Wagyan natin.
Gone, their counseling restraint, or so they say. The 4-hour humanitarian pauses that Israel put into effect on Friday are what passes for progress. That still leaves another 20 hours a day for the Israeli military to...
Okay, from umpisa, no, para maganda na buo. Ayan. Buo, mga suki, no? Ayaw natin parte-parte, mga suki. Buo, marinig natin po itong observation, na? Okay, what US media is missing in Israel war. Pakinggan natin po, mga kababayan. Okay, balanse po pag analyze. Okay, sa bakbakan ito, mga kababayan, na? Ayan, sa conflict ito. Pakinggan natin.
More than a month into the war on Gaza, we're starting with the coverage in the U.S. Freedom of expression is under the gun in the land of the free. In the UK, Canada, and Australia, the journalistic resistance starts with the basics, the terminology in use. And India is generating its own kind of Gaza coverage. It is one-sided and at times dangerous. Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert. As Israel's ground invasion enters a dangerous new phase, we're focusing on the one country with the power to stop the carnage in Gaza, the United States. Close to 11,000 Palestinians have been killed. The UN has called the war zone a children's graveyard. The living find themselves trapped among decaying bodies in the debris. American officials continue to stand by Israel in public. When the cameras are gone, they're counseling restraint, or so they say. The 4-hour humanitarian pauses that Israel put into effect on Friday are what passes for progress. That still leaves another 20 hours a day for the Israeli military to bomb civilians fleeing their homes. Across American news networks, the argument that Israel's mass slaughter of civilians is a justifiable act of self-defense often goes unchallenged, and there has been far too little discussion of a ceasefire. Some U.S. media outlets, though, have produced powerful accounts of this asymmetrical war, but there is an unmistakable, undeniable chill, with too many voices silenced. Criticism of Israel can keep you off the American airwaves, out of print, or even cost you your job. Israel sees the parades and the rallies for the ceasefire, and they see no parades and no rallies for the return of the hostages or the removal of Hamas.
The United States is the armor of Israel. The United States is the diplomatic protector of Israel. That's why the discussion here matters a great deal.
We're in a religious war here. I am with Israel. Do whatever the hell you have to do to defend yourself. Level the place.
There's actually two conversations happening in the US. There's a popular conversation amongst people receiving their information directly from the ground. And a completely different conversation amongst those who are consuming their information from more popular sources of media.
Gaza is not now under siege. Israel has been under siege for 75 years. To understand how biased American media coverage of the war in Gaza can be, just turn on the television. You can see it in what is condemned and what is condoned, in who is dehumanized and who is not, in what is questioned and to...
What is condemned, yung question niya, and what is condoned. Okay, so intindihin niyo po, mga kababayan, no? What is condemned and what is condoned. Okay. So, i-continue natin pakinggan, mga suki. Yan. Ayan.
What extent? Our newspapers
officials, our journalists, our cable news networks are not pushing American officials enough. They're not asking them to condemn the Israeli prime minister talking about genocidal biblical verses to justify their military campaign.
The goal is to destroy Hamas. Hamas is creating these casualties, not Israel.
I don't think anyone's asking, well, some people may be asking Israel to apologize, but that's not what I'm asking about it.
I don't think to this day there is a single editorial board in the United States that has actually called for a ceasefire in spite of the carnage. You know, you're actually seeing some Israeli press take stronger and bolder stances as opposed to newspaper editorial boards here in the country that have more or less fallen in line with what the State Department's party line is.
You have seen American politicians like Marco Rubio or Nikki Haley using genocidal language about Gaza.
And I'll say this to Prime Minister Netanyahu, finish them.
Marco Rubio said,
I don't think there's any way Israel can be expected to coexist or find some diplomatic off-ramp with these savages.
and neither of those comments were treated with the kind of shock they deserve to be treated with.
Americans were among those horrified by the gruesome images they saw on October 7th, after Hamas's attack that killed more than 1,400 Israelis. Since then, too many in the U.S. media have been taking their cues from the Biden administration. Its insistence that what Israel is doing, despite the killing of more than 10,000 Palestinians, somehow remains an act of self-defense.
Almost every military analyst has said that a ceasefire could give Hamas the opportunity to regroup and carry out future attacks.
More than 2/3 of Americans now want a ceasefire. It is a growing movement that is insufficiently reflected in the mainstream media commentary, which often draws the line well short of that.
What about Israeli officials that I've talked to about these calls for a ceasefire? They say that just gives Hamas time to regroup.
Interviewees tend to repeat the Israeli media's talking points on Hamas, hospitals, and human shields.
The storing of munitions, all kinds of explosives under hospitals, under refugee camps, under civilian targets, the use of civilians as really just tools of war by Hamas.
Those are claims that Israel has made many times before, but have never been verified. On the question of representation and who gets to be heard, a body speaking for Arab and Middle Eastern journalists says it is deeply troubled by reports that journalists of Middle Eastern descent are being sidelined from reporting or commenting on the current war, while suggestions for nuance and precise language in reporting are being ignored in newsrooms.
There's not necessarily, this red line that editors have that, you're not allowed to say this or you're not allowed to say that. There is a culture of fear in our institutions here about talking honestly and freely about this, because whenever something that sheds light on human rights violations committed by Israel, then there's usually a massive pushback campaign and people are afraid of it.
Newspapers like the New York Times and Washington Post have done an admirable job of reporting on what's going on in Gaza. I've seen plenty of stories of the coverage of civilian harm in Gaza. Cable television, by contrast, because of the sort of nature of cable TV, it's sort of short segments, kind of favoring sound bites. The sort of type of analysis you're getting there is just truncated and often misinformed.
When taking in the coverage of Gaza, or even scrolling through their social media, Americans should consider who they are not hearing from. Voices that have been silenced, journalists who have been fired over the positions they have taken online. They include a New York Times Magazine writer who signed a joint letter opposing the Israel-Gaza war, was questioned by her editor about that, and ended up resigning. After the editor of Harper's Bazaar magazine tweeted that Israel's cutting off power to Gaza was inhuman, the magazine's parent company, Hearst, banned its employees from expressing personal political opinions on social media. This goes beyond news outlets, into the art world. The New York-based magazine Art Forum fired its editor-in-chief after he signed a petition calling for a ceasefire, one that neglected to condemn Hamas's attack on October 7th.
it seems like the top executives of these corporate media outlets are actually in a pitch battle with the producers who want to tell a different story. I have been blacklisted by several outlets, as I've been told by producers. My clips have also been censored, and even though they've aired live, have not been posted on their websites. The explanations for it is that I either made the anchor look bad or that I'm too evocative. None of the reasons provided have to do with I said something that wasn't true or I was inflammatory in any way. It was literally other reasons in order to craft a particular kind of story where we can express empathy for.
Ang ibig sabihin po mga kababayan, tinatago ang balita mga suki, no? Hindi pinalabas. Okay, tinatago lang o tinatago lang sa kanilang mga archive o kaya news platform. Hindi po ipamamalita mga kababayan. Yun po ang ibig sabihin niyan, sabi ng babae ito mga kababayan. No? Okay, so continue natin. Tinatago po ang balita kasi may magpigil po mga kababayan. No? May magpigil sa kanila. Yun po ang pinaka-dangerous po sa communication mga kababayan. No? Okay, sa tagal na experience ko, yan po pinaka-dangerous po communication mga kababayan. Okay? Na ang balitang katotohanan po ay hindi po binabalita mga suki, no? So, ayan. Sa tagal ng karanasan natin po pagbabalita, no? Okay. Yan. Alam yan ng mga producer magagawa ng balita, no? Okay, kung gusto mo palabas o hindi mo gusto palabas, nasa control po yan ng boss. Okay, ng mga television, radio, lahat-lahat na po mga kababayan na. Okay. Mga importante balita ay dapat palabasin, hindi po ipapalabas, no? Okay, kasi may pigil. Yan po ang ibig sabihin po mga kababayan na. Okay. Ayan.
Palestinian lives, but not point the finger about why they are being killed in a genocidal campaign and who is doing it.
To express support for Palestine brings many different risks. It risks you being ostracized within the broader media world. It risks you not getting career opportunities. It risks you being on the front page of a tabloid newspaper, and labeled a terrorist sympathizer. And that is reflected in both the coverage from the last month and also the broader climate of repression that we have seen in so many different areas of public life.
After almost a month of locking the international media out of the war zone and then disputing the reporting of Palestinians inside Gaza, Israel finally allowed some Western journalists to enter this past week under certain conditions. The reporters have to be embedded with Israeli forces that act as their protectors and ultimately their editors.
As a condition to enter Gaza under IDF escort, outlets have to submit all materials and footage to the Israeli military for review prior to publication.
I applaud CNN and others who are at least telling their audiences that their information is filtered by the Israeli state.
CNN has agreed to these terms in order to provide you, the viewers, a limited window into Israel's operations in Gaza.
But I think that they should have done more to push back against the conditions that first, that they had to be embedded with the Israeli military, and that second, none of their coverage would be published without the approval of the state. So literally all that's filtering out is state propaganda.
The population will be able to go from the north to the south surely, not freely, in order to get the IDF do what it needs to do in order to demolish Hamas.
And I think here it's incumbent upon audiences to exercise scrutiny. Why is Israel preventing a foreign press from entering?
Good Morning America on ABC News, where they said
This was a rare, short, and quite intense
opportunity to see what the situation is like in Gaza on the ground.
It's only rare if you are overlooking all of the journalism from inside Gaza, going towards the violence, not away from it, through unbearable conditions to actually bring the world these stories.
I just was going to get closer to my grandma, and I was right here. House there.
Around 36 journalists inside Gaza have been killed, reporting through unimaginable personal, emotional trauma, losing their families, and to erase all of that is very, very shameful.
Gusto ko lang mag-comment dito, no? Akala kasi ng mga nakikinig, ang trabaho ito ay maghawak ng microphone ay madali, no? O kaya hindi ka at-risk dito. Okay? Hindi ka delikado rito. Okay? Kaya nga, itong trabaho ito ay kailangan tapangan mga suki, no? Okay, very risk trabaho po mag-work sa mga itong katulad mga ginawakan natin, no? Okay, maraming okay, dapat i-consider mga suki, no? Okay, mga tagapakinig. Okay, ang buhay mo ay tinataya mo rito mga kababayan pag pumasok ka sa trabaho ito, no? Okay, buhay mo ang tinataya mo rito. Okay, akala kasi ng iba, maganda lang nakikinig, mga kanda lang, okay, kasi may mga balita. Pero ang sa kabila noon, sa back noon, sa likod noon ay napakadelikado mga suki, na? Okay, napakadelikado. Okay, itong maghawak ng microphone. Okay, kahit mabuti pa yung mga magsulat, hindi gaano po. Pero yung maghawak ng microphone ay very dangerous mga suki, na? Okay, at risk ka talaga. Okay, suicidal ka. Okay, sa trabaho po pag-handle ng news mga kababayan, no? Mga suki natin. Continue natin ng analysis. Okay, patas na analysis po ng independent news na ito, mga kababayan, na? Ayan.
That is not to dismiss some quality American news coverage of this war and its impact on Palestinian civilians. This CNN interview with a nurse who worked in Gaza will stick with viewers.
There were children with just massive burns down their faces, down their necks, all over their limbs. And because the hospitals are so overwhelmed, they are being discharged immediately after. And
still, U.S. news output is pulling its punches on the scale of the killing, the mass displacement, the crimes against humanity. In examining this war, perhaps Americans need to reflect on some of their own colonial history, to remember that all colonizers, including Americans, started out by occupying the land of the other.
The fact that for most Americans, they cannot critically examine Israel also represents their own blind spots of understanding themselves as living within a settler racial colony, as benefiting from white supremacy on lands that are still colonized and not ceded by over 500 indigenous nations. Everything that we can critique Americans for failing to see in the humanity of Palestinians reflects their own inability to see themselves. So Palestine here is not an exception. The rule is a colonial framework and a liberal understanding that somehow we've overcome colonialism, which is not true. We continue to exist in an enduring colonial reality.
The vast majority of mainstream news outlets in the U.S. are corporate owned. Elsewhere in the Anglosphere, though, publicly funded broadcasters are taking heat over their coverage of the Gaza story, and some of that, as Nick Muirhead explains, comes from within.
First up, Richard, is the BBC in the UK. Rami Ruhayem, the network's correspondent in Beirut, sent an email to Director General Tim Davie expressing his concerns. He argued that historical context and significant information, including expert opinion, that Israel's actions could amount to.
Okay, sa mga ganito trabaho, okay, yung mga sa mainstream mga kabayan, magpadala ka, halimbawa magpadala ka ng mga balita, huwag mo sasabihin na maaprobahan yan mga kababayan, no? Okay, mga nakinig. Okay, sinasala pa yan ng husto po ang mga balita, no? Okay, pag magpadala ka sa mga malaking outfit, huwag ka umasa ka, ibig sabihin makapasa mga suki, no? Okay. Isasala pa ng husto yan po kung pwede ba o hindi ang balita mo mga kababayan, no? Okay, mga suki natin. So, ayan po ang sa mga naranasan natin, no? Ayan. Okay, ito po.
Genocide was either entirely missing or not being given due prominence. When Davey failed to reply to that email, Ruhayem shared it with the rest of his colleagues at the BBC. In Canada, a lawyer journalist had similar things to say about CBC's coverage. He interrupted a speech the network's CEO, Catherine Tate, was giving.
You are not telling the truth as an organization about the genocide happening in Gaza before the eyes of the world.
In Australia, more than 200 employees at ABC met to point out issues again over terminology and the network's reliance on Israeli military's talking points. They also called out ABC's refusal to use certain terms, such as occupation, apartheid, and genocide, even invasion. We're just back to the UK for a moment and an instance of journalism that rose to the challenge. Channel 4's Sikandar Kamani was embedded with the Israeli military in Gaza when they came across Palestinians fleeing the bombardment.
They're not allowed by the military to go any closer.
Israeli soldiers can prevent journalists embedded with them from interviewing Gazan refugees. What they cannot do is stop those news organizations from working with Palestinian reporters to tell that side of the story.
Footage filmed on the Salahuddin Road by Palestinian journalists gives you a true sense of scale.
And showcasing the scale of this tragedy is something Channel 4 has been very effective in doing.
Thanks, Nick. Israel's Hasbara campaign, its PR effort to win diplomatic backing and shape public perception, is in overdrive these days. Not that it's really needed in places like India. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been crystal clear in his backing of this war. New Delhi says it sees it as an act of counterterrorism and self-defense. Just last month, when the UN voted in favor of a humanitarian pause, India abstained. Indo-Israeli relations have been on the upswing for the past few years now. The image of Israel as a high-tech, prosperous nation that survives in a region populated by quote-unquote enemies resonates with many Indians. And they've been showing their support through posts online, rants on television, with some disinformation thrown in to skew how this conflict is understood. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on the pro-Israeli messaging that's coming out of India and why it matters.
Israel is at war. We didn't want this war. It was forced upon us in the most brutal and savage way.
2 days after Hamas fighters burst out of Gaza and carry out one of the most audacious attacks on Israeli territory, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office posts this video online.
Hamas will understand that by attacking us, they've made a mistake of historic proportions.
Within minutes, the message has thousands of shares and replies. Numerous Israeli posts demand Netanyahu's resignation. But there's another set of messages from Indians, and they are all in.
So the responses from Indian accounts have been extraordinary, to say the least. Sometimes they put up posters in which they say, "We stand with Israel." Sometimes they put graphics of two hands in a clasp painted with Israeli and Indian flags. Sometimes they've just tried to reflect on how this conflict in Gaza mirrors the kind of challenges that India faces security-wise.
When we try to understand why is there such a widespread interest in India with respect to this particular conflict, one of the things is a shared experience of terrorism. When October 7th happened, Hamas's attack on Israel, in India, almost immediately parallels were drawn with the 26/11 experience, which were a major terrorist attack happening on the Indian city of Mumbai in 2008.
To me, it had a lot of shades of our own 26/11
when you had terrorists coming from Pakistan on boats and creating the rampage that they did.
This major space that Israel suddenly started to occupy in the Indian imagination was because that common thread was found.
The same radical, jihadist, Islamist, terrorist thinking that Israel is a victim of, we are a victim of as well. Israel is fighting this war on behalf of all of us. Israel is fighting this war for you and me.
New Delhi's support for Israel was swift and unequivocal. Prime Minister Narendra Modi tweeted in solidarity, and Indian news outlets, as though on cue, went on a war footing themselves. Channels that just a few months earlier had not seen fit to send their journalists to cover unprecedented violence in India's northeastern state of Manipur, they dispatched reporters all the way to Israel.
Heavy bombs are being used right now to take out the Hamas leadership, and there is collateral damage.
Proclamations of vengeance and calls for mass killing were issued from Indian news studios.
आपकी पॉलिसी वो होनी चाहिए 1000 for 1. अगर आपके 1000 इजराइल के बच्चे शहीद हुए हैं तो उनके 10 लाख होने चाहिए.
The coverage, I think, has been extremely sensationalist and dramatic. There was a reporter who was asked to quiet down by Israeli soldiers because of how loudly he was trying to cover what was happening. Then there's another reporter from a channel who was reporting from a paraglider after reports came out that Hamas crossed the border on paragliders. There's also been misinformation shared by Indian news channel. There was a video of a group of people carrying what looked like a dead body, but when they put down the person got up and walked away. So this video was shared with the claim that Palestinians are faking the death of the victims. But this video turned out to be from 2020, and it was shot in Jordan during COVID lockdown, and it was by a bunch of people who were trying to flout the lockdown rules.
Whereas in the past, Israelis would send out disinformation or their talking points, and they would land on American and British mainstream media platforms. Now you have large Indian accounts amplifying this. Just a few days ago, a BJP leader addressed a rally, and he invented a set of his own lines. And then lamented about the kind of small pockets of support that some Indian Muslims have shown or displayed for Palestinians in India. And he asked them, do you want Hamas to come to India?
This is how hate and misinformation works. You keep repeating something again and again and again, that, there is Islamic terror and how Israel is trying to protect itself. And then there is a Muslim threat in India and how Hindus are trying to protect themselves. And if you keep repeating this, there comes a time when people who are consuming this or who may be misinformed, when they see that Muslims are treated with a lot of violence, they can, one, justify it, or two, just say that they deserve it. So what happens is that you take away how a normal human being would react to someone who's facing violence. And this is essentially what hate and misinformation achieves.
Modern-day India and the State of Israel came into being within a year of each other. India through its independence from British rule in 1947, Israel through its expulsion of Palestinians and the establishment of the state in 1948. On the question of Palestine, India's independence leaders Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, they were vocal in their support. In 1936, when Palestinians rose up against the British and their push for a Jewish state, Nehru compared Palestine with India under colonial rule. He talked about a gross betrayal of the Arabs by British imperialism. Palestine was not an empty land. It was well populated with little room for large numbers of colonists. Is it any wonder that the Arabs objected to this intrusion? A little more than 10 years later, when the United Nations voted to create the State of Israel, there were only 3 non-Arab countries that voted against that resolution. India was one of them. Times have changed, so have the geopolitics.
historically speaking, I mean, I'm referring to the post 1947 era, which is when we got independent. India and Israel haven't really had a very nice or cozy relationship that you probably see now. That has come after 2014, which is when Prime Minister Modi has come to power. And of course, one of the reasons is that both these countries have nationalistic governments, and that perhaps is one of the ideological reasons why the relationship has taken off.
So relations between India and Israel did not start with Narendra Modi. But what happens in 2014 is Modi and Netanyahu meet properly, officially, at the UN General Assembly in New York. And they agree at that moment to, quote, tear down the remaining walls between the two countries. India purchases around 50% of all weapons sold by Israel per year. And India is also beginning to co-produce weapons, and they're working in agriculture, they're working in tech, they're working in cybersecurity.
2017 was the first time that an Indian Prime Minister actually traveled to Israel, and you see a kind of an upgrade in the relations ever since.
हिंदुस्तान और इजराइल दो ऐसे जुड़वा भाई जैसे मुल्क हैं जिन्होंने करीब करीब एक ही वक्त आजादी की सांस ली और आजादी के 70 साल बाद जब किसी भारतीय प्रधानमंत्री के पहले कदम इजराइल की धरती पर पड़े तो दोनों भाई टूट कर गले मिले.
In the past month, India has reaffirmed its support for the establishment of a Palestinian state, the so-called two-state solution.
Towards establishing a sovereign, independent and viable state of Palestine.
New Delhi has also sent medical and disaster relief aid to Gazans. How much of that made it past the Israeli blockade and into the Strip is not known. The war is a big story in India, and as it rages on, it is folding into another, even bigger domestic story.
India is going into a huge election next year, and this issue will serve as a way to consolidate the Hindu nationalist base in India. It serves Modi very well electorally to be seen as close to Israel, as a country that's able to put Muslims in their place, but it's also about modernizing the state. The BJP has pushed this narrative that in order to be a strong, militaristic, global player, it had to be close to Israel.
All this rhetoric around minorities and the domestic sentiment with respect to minorities, I think it is really not understood well. And it is often, foreign media that falls for a certain kind of narrative. And that leads to a rather skewed understanding of how Indian societies actually operate.
I think it is too soon to tell how this war will play out when it comes to elections in India next year. But there are already posts that are claiming, you have to stand up against Islamic terrorism. Otherwise, what would happen in India is what is happening in Israel. So for Hindus to protect themselves from this threat is to re-elect Prime Minister Modi.
Just one final note. Those of you watching on YouTube may have had to jump through a few hoops to see our latest reporting, having to sign in because of age restrictions or simply not being recommended our content. Now, there are a number of reasons for that, but one of the biggest has to do with advertisers. Companies that don't want their ads up against images of the suffering that this war has produced. We are not going to change the way we cover this story just to please an algorithm. So, if you value our journalism, please share it. It is more important than ever that these stories are heard. We'll see you next time here at the Listening Post.
Okay, mga kababayan, break muna tayo. And then, balikan natin mo kung meron pang balitang nakasalang, no? Ayan. So, ganoon po ang kalagayan po ng mga news, no? Okay, latest for data release nila. Galing nga sa mga independent news. Hindi ako magkuha po sa mga balitang hindi totoo mga suki. So, galing sa independent news, ang mga grupo po ng journalist na matay dyan ay umabot na po ng 105, no? Ang latest count, 105. Okay, journalist po nadali po dyan sa kauna-unahan natin, no? Kauna-unahan na napakamaraming namatay po itong samahanay ng journalist po dyan po sa Gaza. Okay, sa palibot po ng Gaza, mga suki, no? Okay, mga tagapakinig. Okay, anong ibalita natin, no? Okay. Tingnan natin kung ano pa pwede pa ibalita natin, no? Ayan. Okay, sabi po na Gunigundo ay baligtad na ito na naman. Okay, sabi po ng ni Secretary of Finance Benjamin Diokno ay mag-cut ng rate, no? Sabi naman ni Gunigundo, okay, key interest rate likely to stay high. Basahin natin po ang okay, balita ito po sa Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, no? Ayan. Sige. Okay, sandali lang mga suki, no? Okay. Okay, inflation appeared to be trending lower, but monetary authorities are likely to start, okay, cutting key interest rate anytime soon. A former senior Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas official said, no? Itong si Gunigundo. Okay. Sige ba? Tingnan natin kung bakit ano po sinasabi ni Diwa Gunigundo, mga suki, no? Okay, who was Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas Deputy Governor when he retired in 2019, noted in a Global Source Partner commentary on Monday that December inflation result could cement a return the easing seen February to July last year. Okay, mga suki, no? Si Gunigundo. Ayan. Okay. With December inflation moderating to 3.9%, a shade lower, okay, than the lower end of the 2.0% to 4.0% inflation target. This could likely establish another episode in the downtrend, he said. Ayan. Okay, this started in September 2023 with the price growth hitting 6.1%, sustaining it at 4.9% in October and 4.1% in November. He added. Sabi po ni Gunigundo, mga suki, no? Ayan. Oh, yan. Okay, saan na yan? Oh. I-continue natin balita, no? Average inflation, however, remain above target, raised 6.0% last year And Gunigundo noted that the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas subsequently remain hawkish about the policy setting. Okay, where the central bank projected a baseline inflation at a 3.7% for 2024 and a 3.2% for 2025. Okay, ayan. Its risk-adjusted inflation forecasts are rather precarious, he added. Precarious mga supina. Okay, for the year, it is expected at a 4.2% is breaching the inflation target, while for next year, a projection inflation is to hit 3.4%. Highest fare, power rates, and oil prices have been identified as a positive risk. And Gotegundo also pointed out that the Trade Department had just announced that 29% of the commodities, the suggested return price list could become costlier. Costlier mga kababayan. Ibig sabihin, okay, problema naman sa kusina mga kababayan, no? Okay, problema naman ng gastos sa kusina. Okay. Ayan po, cost of living naman ang tinatarget ito, ibig sabihin, no? Ayan. Sabi pa ni Gundo, hindi ko sabi. Hindi ko sinasabi. Okay. While present could stay within the target, it is early part of the 24. He said that base effects, could see it hitting, 4.0% or higher toward the middle of the year. Yan po ang prediction po ni Diwa Gunigundo mga suki na. Okay, mga apat na paragraph pa. Was believed that the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas will remain a higher interest rate for longer precisely because first of all, considering its previous monetary tightening is yet to fully take effect because of a long lags of monetary adjustment, Diwa Gunigundo said. Okay, upside risk, to the baseline forecast, including global uncertainty, remain dominant, such as that an early reset could trigger a price upsurge and a upset inflation expectation. Na? So, dalawang paragraph na lang. Keeping a rate higher for longer, Gunigundo said, do not necessarily lead to bad result on both output and employment, adding that the dissonant voices on the policy front could create a black noise in the market and it could undermine faith in public policy. Okay, isang paragraph na lang, a more vigorous pursuit of a non-monetary measure, particularly those involving agricultural and logistic support, will definitely be helpful to the cause of inflation management. The former Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas official said, no? Si Diwa guni-gundo na yon ang ibig sabihin mga suki mga kababayan na. Ayan. So, okay, magtaas para ang gastos natin sa kusina, no? Sabi po ni Diwa. Okay. Costlier ang conclusion niya, mari po magtaas po ang price po ng mga pagkain natin, no? So, problema sa kusina. Okay, problema sa pitaka, problema po sa kusina, no? Ayan po sinabi ko ni Diwa. Okay, guni-gundo mga suki, mga kababayan. Ano pa pwede ibabalita kahit mga hap lang sana? Ayan. Okay. Okay, itong kami mga senior citizen po mga kababayan. Okay, charter chain budget could reach ano yan, 48 billion. Okay. Ayan. So, yan po, no? Okay, investment franchise could be restored in 2024, no? So, sa babalik po sa ere. Ayan. Okay, si Lisa Aranete, Ilongga ata mga suki, no? Okay. May dugong Ilonggo. Okay. Sige po mga suki, no? Anong oras na? Okay, saan ang orasan ko? Okay, mga suki, mga kababayan, 50 na minutos po pasado alas 8 mga suki, no? Ayan. Okay, wala nang oras. Ayan po mga suki, no? Okay, lahat ng balita ito brought to you by Mind the Global Food Lines Corporation, mga suki, no? Ayan. Okay, break muna natin pag balik natin. Okay, wala na tayong balita, no? Sige. Okay, wala na. Wala nang oras. Awesome! 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 Okay. So, wala tayong magawa. Magpaalam na tayo kasi isang oras ng programa natin. Babalik tayo mamayang hapon, no? Okay, dito po sa Consolidated News natin, mga suki-suki sa kahanginan. Okay. Ay pinoproduce po ng Mind the Global Food Lines, no? Okay, siya po mag-produce ng balita ito. Okay. At saka mga negosyo po ng Mind the Global Food Lines. Okay. Bili kayo ng mga produkto niya, no? Okay, para makasustain tayo. Okay, tuloy-tuloy po ang takbo po ng news ito. Ayan po, masukin, no? Ayan. Okay, dito po sa himpilan po ng ADLSNTV News Corporation. Okay? Sa programa naman ng Halo-Halo Special Opinion Balita Tiba pa. And then kasama po ang Serbisyo Publiko Tinig ng Mamamayan. Okay, kasama po ng ay sumbungan ng mamamayan. Okay, mga kaibigan natin po, no? Ayan. Okay, yon po ang balita po mga sugit tungkol sa ito yung US media, no? Okay, inanalyze po okay ng isang katulad din ng trabaho ko maghawak ng microphone, no? Okay, kanya lang sa kanya mag-English, sa akin naman ay Taglish mga suki. Okay, para maintindihan mo naman ng mga local. Ayan. So, ito po ang katapusan ng balita natin sa araw ito. Okay, wala tayong masamang tinapay sa mga balita natin, no? Okay, tayo ay maghatid lang po ng mga mahalagang information po para sa lahat, no? Okay, para pagdepensa po, okay, ng kapayapaan. Okay, sa local, national, regional, pati na rin sa buong daigdig mga suki, no? Okay, paalam ako. Okay, wala tayong masamang tinapay. Minulit natin. This has been abs naman lamang po, no? Okay, bye-bye na. Ayan.
Station